Hey everybody, it's Kelly. Welcome back to another episode of Ask a Therapist. This channel celebrated 4 years recently. We have been doing this for 4 years. I don't know what else to say about that. Over the last 3 or so years, my highest viewed video has been about internalized homophobia. It keeps being one of the highest viewed videos for people because this is something people come back to over and over and over again and realize that they're dealing with, because we live in a society that continues to tell queer people that there's something wrong with who they are. So I thought, as a 4-year anniversary present, I would list out for you some of the ways that I still see internalized homophobia show up in people's lives and some ways to sort of check and see if that's true for you. Internalized homophobia. Quick definition, internalized homophobia is that internalized feeling that being queer, being part of the LGBTQIA plus community, identifying as anything that is not cisgender and heterosexual is wrong. Number one, who you're attracted to. This is an interesting one because it doesn't have to be internalized homophobia, but often I see with people that they are attracted to objectively attractive people that people of any gender identity would say is attractive. It validates their attraction to them no matter the gender of the person or the person they're attracted to. So, for instance, if a woman shows up to an event with an objectively beautiful woman as her date, and everyone in the room can agree this woman is attractive, it sort of validates her choosing this person as her date, and she's no longer needing to be seen as a lesbian or a bisexual woman or just in general a woman on a date with a woman, because everyone in the room can understand that she is there with this objectively beautiful woman. Because if everyone can agree, then everyone can understand. Whereas if you're going with who you find attractive and maybe they aren't universally meeting these very arbitrary beauty standards that the rest of the world has decided are whatever those beauty standards are, then there's judgment about the two people who are out. And then there's judgment about being queer. I will say that I have seen many people who utilize this attraction model and are attracted to and want to be seen with people who fit this universal beauty image in order to validate their identity as a queer person, because people ask less questions about why are you with someone of the same gender expression as you if you are with someone that everyone agrees is attractive. And it works the same way with men. If a man is seen with a man that everyone agrees is a very attractive man, everyone can say, oh, I get that. It's a little less so with men because there's that toxic piece of masculinity where men aren't willing to admit when another man is attractive, and that's literally an entire different video, but it still works kind of the same with men, where if you can be seen with someone that everyone does find attractive, there's a certain amount of acceptability to that also attaches itself to your sexual identity, in that your attraction to this person is much more understandable for whatever reason because they are attractive. Because again, like I've said in many videos, we have boiled attraction down to what you're doing with them in private or in public, but of a sexual nature. Number 2, gender roles, either on dates or in relationships. Sometimes it doesn't show up until a relationship has sort of found its groove and you find yourself sort of in those more normative gender roles of one of you is doing this more typical woman chore and one of you is doing this more typical man chore. But in reality, it also shows up in the beginning of relationships when you're going out on dates and who's paying and who's doing the asking and who's doing the driving. And a lot of those pieces, we tend to fall into those roles because those are the ways that we understand dating to be. That's how we understand relationships to be. That's how we've seen it modeled as we grow up and become people who get into relationships and become people who date people. When you only see relationships work a certain way in media, in books, in any kind of movie, or even when you're following influencers on Instagram or you're following YouTubers that show their relationships and their families on their channels, when you're seeing this stuff for yourself on your screens wherever you see it, and you're seeing it over and over and over again, it is getting ingrained into you. And that understanding of this is the way to be, no matter how it is, the internalized homophobia piece is I am validating my identity as a queer person if I can make it look like a heterosexual relationship. That's actually internalized homophobia. The other side to that, that's not internalized homophobia, is division of labor or division of roles that feels natural to everybody as a person. And that can be a fine line. Figuring out, are you the one who does this particular thing because that is what you naturally typically do? Or is it because you have decided, or the relationship has decided, or society has decided that you fit that role, and so that's what you're going to do? You need to figure that out for yourself. I'm just saying I have seen many people fall into that because internalized homophobia has told them to be valid in that relationship or in that interaction. They have to fall into that gendered role because they feel most closely aligned to what society has said that gender is to be. And in order to calm that internalized homophobia, they have to align themselves in that way, and that'll make them valid. Number 3, people pleasing. This is a tough one because it can also happen with people who grow up in homes with overly critical, overly strict, overly religious parents, which we know a lot of queer people also have had those circumstances, which are not in any way connected to them being queer. A person who's dealing with internalized homophobia feels as though they are not acceptable as they are to society. And in order to make up for that, they are trying to make themselves indispensable to those around them. So at a job or in their friendships, they're trying to make sure the role they fill with the people in their lives is indispensable. And they do that because if at some point they become unacceptable to them, that need that that person has for them in their lives will cause that person to keep them, okay? So whether they're out to the person or not, somewhere inside is that fear that at some point they're going to say, I don't want you around anymore. And because that fear is connected to the idea there's something inherently unacceptable about them because they're queer, they need to find something that makes them essential in the lives of people that are important to them. So again, their boss, they need to shine as an employee. In their friendships, they need to be indispensable with advice, or they need to be the one who's always there, or they need to be, I don't know, the funny one and the one that lightens the mood. They need to be significant in the lives of people around them so that if they do decide they are unacceptable, if they possibly might even think about dismissing that person from their lives, that indispensable part of them will keep them connected and they won't lose that person. So people pleasing is a huge way that people dealing with internalized homophobia can stay connected to people in their lives. And that one is so interesting to me because in reality, it doesn't matter whether that person has ever expressed that they wouldn't care about them if they were queer. It doesn't matter how long that person's known them. None of that actually matters. That all comes from internal places for that person. The last one I want to address is self-sabotage. This one's huge. There's so many instances in so many people's lives that I have seen where they don't quite invest in a relationship, in a friendship, sometimes in a job. They don't quite give themselves over to it. They don't quite show up. And they do that because then when it ends, they're not to blame or they don't hurt quite as much. And also because their own internalized homophobia has told them they don't deserve that happiness. There's a piece buried so far down, especially for people who have been out and queer and thought that they conquered all their demons years ago and aren't necessarily aware that this piece of them is still there, but they can't figure out why none of their relationships ever work out or none of their friendships ever work out or why everybody seems to leave at some point in their relationship with them and they just can't figure out why they're all alone again. And in reality, there's something internal in them that seeks out relationships with people who are not necessarily emotionally available or aren't able to give what that person needs in a relationship or in a friendship because they don't have it in themselves, or they're asking maybe too much of a friendship or a relationship because they know that they ask too much, that person's probably not going to stay. And there's so many different reasons why people self-sabotage in relationship to other people, friendship, romantic, and any relationship to other people, but they do it because they don't feel like they are worth the relationship. They they don't feel like they deserve happiness or deserve kindness. They don't feel like they deserve people staying. And that, I think, is probably the most common way that I have seen internalized homophobia show up in people's lives, especially over the last couple of years. It's so hard to put yourself out there and authentically connect, and it can be really hard to trust that connection too. But I can say that when dealing with that self-sabotage piece of internalized homophobia, that piece that tells you that you don't deserve that connection anyway, that can be a piece that'll guarantee you never get that connection, because that piece is so convinced that there's something so very wrong with you that you can't be loved or cared for or connected to. And that didn't necessarily come from you, and that didn't necessarily come from your family of origin, maybe, or maybe it did, or didn't necessarily come from society, or maybe it did. Wherever that came from, for most people who are dealing with internalized homophobia, it feels like it came from a very valid place, and it feels like a very valid message. If that's something that you're doing, it's very hard to figure out by yourself. And I would advocate for you to find a therapist, if you can, to dig into that. Because if that is something that you're working through, undoing that or stopping doing that is really stopping doing a lot of habits that you've built up for yourself to keep yourself safe, and undoing some of those habits needs time and care and intentionality. And that's it for today. Thank you so much for being here. I will see you all next time. And until then, take care of yourselves and each other.